The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, everyone, wherever you are in Queensland, and welcome to the Peak Services Lunch and Learn series. We're looking at Unit 4 today, which is about getting the best out of the people that you lead. Don't know what the weather's like where you are, but I'm in Brisbane and she's starting to be a little bit windy and woolly outside, so we'll see what happens. So hopefully it won't have any impact on internet connection. Could I just check to make sure that I'm being heard? So could I ask you over in the question box on the right-hand side, if you could just write the word clear in there, at least I know that I'm coming across clear. Thanks, Jake. Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, John. Thanks, Jenny. Thank you. Good. Okay, there's quite a few people coming through, so it's obviously clear that I'm coming through loud and clear, which is very, very good. Okay, now the usual thing, of course, is that you'll get a copy of the slides at the end of this presentation and the recording. And I'm planning on getting these sent out pretty much this afternoon so you can review them. So just relax and enjoy the presentation. Now, what I'm going to share with you today is some ways and means of getting that little extra discretionary effort from the people that you lead, which is obviously a big challenge for anyone in a leadership role. Sometimes it seems like it's impossible, but hopefully I can throw enough things at you for you to think about and perhaps try some things that might work. And even if they don't work, it's not the end of the earth. Nothing's going to change. But I suspect that some of them will work. So let's get into the presentation. So what you can see on your screen now is a list of the topics that we've covered. So we're up to number 4 today, and I won't go through, of course, and revise the other 3 sessions that we've done. What I will say, though, that when I do send out the slides and the recording to you this afternoon, you'll be required to do your second diagnostic, which will be understanding people and their personalities. Now, this isn't an electronic version. You'll have to download it and fill it out in a manual format. I haven't got that up online yet, but nevertheless, it'll be effective for you, because when I debrief you in 2 weeks in Unit 5, what I'm going to be covering there is the whole notion of personality and understanding people and their personalities. So just a pre-warning there that there is a diagnostic to complete, but I think you'll find it's worthwhile and you'll find it's quite interesting and a bit of an eye-opener, actually, when it comes to understanding the people that you lead in your team. And then, of course, the last session we'll look at is facilitating effective meetings. All right, so that's where we've come from. And at any time during the presentation, you're more than welcome, of course, to type in a question or a comment or an observation. I'm more than happy to hear those, and I'll certainly deal with them as they come. And as you'd be aware at this stage, I don't leave a 10-minute pause at the end, awkward pause when people have to make up their mind what questions they want to ask. So as soon as you've got something you'd like to say, go ahead and say it and write it in. And remember, I'm the only one that gets to see the questions, and I'll refer to it nevertheless as soon as I see it. Okay, now this slide pretty much sums up my philosophy about leading people. So whether you're in local government or wherever, I don't think it makes any difference. I think that your primary role as a leader is to get the very best from the people in your team. Now, you might say there's a whole lot of other roles there, you know, you've got to get the work done and all the rest of it, of course. But ultimately, as a leader, your role is to get the very best from the people that you lead. Now, that's important because I think sometimes if you could categorize your team on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of their level of motivation. So, for example, 10 out of 10 is high, 1 out of 10, of course, is very low. If that's the case, then it's possible that if you could categorize people, you might say, well, this person over here is a 6, and this person over here is a 4, and this person over here is a 5. Your job is to try to get them to a 6, a 7, a 6, and a 5, respectively. In other words, it's about getting some discretionary effort from people it's highly unlikely that you'll ever get everyone in your team at least at a 10 out of 10. So just relax with that, because if you've got a team of 5 people and you can get each person to improve their discretionary effort by, say, 10%, you're talking about a 50% exponential productivity growth in your team, which obviously is not a bad result. So it's not about getting everyone to a 10. It's about perhaps getting people from a 6 to a 7, as I mentioned. And what I'm hoping to do in this program is give you some ways and means of doing that. Excuse me, I've just got a bit of a frog in the throat. Okay, so with that in mind, let's have a look at what we're going to be covering during this session. Now, the first thing I want to do is talk about some myths around motivation. I mean, there's a lot of nonsense that's written about motivation, and I just want to dispel what those myths are, because they're very real and they're so prevalent that people start to believe them after a while. So let's just try and unpack that and understand what motivation actually is. Secondly, I want to share with you some research that was conducted with 9,000 people across 3 continents. And pretty much the question was around, what do you want out of your job? So this gives us some very clear indicators of a top 10 things that people want in the work that they do. And I guess the point there is that if you look at these 10 things, the question for you is, what can you do, if anything, to try to improve each of those 10 things? And by doing that, of course, you've got a chance of actually helping people improve their own performance. I'm going to share with you the concept of non-job roles. Now, in local government, job roles are tied up in the job description. They're the tasks, the discretionary tasks that people are supposed to do. These are the things that people get paid to do. But non-job roles are still critically important to performance. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because I find in my experience of working in local government that this is an area that we don't do particularly well. And then I guess the final thing that I want to do today is talk about some models of motivation. Now, there are myriad models of motivation out there. I don't want to bombard you with, hundreds, not that I'd have time anyway, of models, but I want to share with you a couple that are very straightforward and very practical and very usable. So I'll do that as I get towards the end of the presentation. Okay, so that's basically where we're going for the next hour. Now, what you're seeing on your screen right now is a definition of motivation. So I think we should start with what is motivation, because again, there's some misleading information about that. And as you can see from the middle there on this busy slide, it says the forces within an individual that accounts for the level, direction and persistence of effort expended at the job. Now, there are a couple of key words there that are important. One of those is within. So in other words, motivation is an inside job. So you can do all sorts of things, but ultimately it's the decision that the person makes to whether they're motivated or demotivated. So ultimately you don't have complete control over that. So it's an inside job. And there are 3 dimensions to it, which I'm going to cover shortly with you. And so when you look at someone in your team and you think to yourself, that person's demotivated, the question that I then ask you is, what is the dimension that's being violated? And there are 3. So let's run through those, and they're on your screen. So the very first one there is the direction. And the direction refers to the choices that people make in terms of what they focus on at work. So in other words, if people are doing work that they shouldn't be doing, and I'm not necessarily talking about, being on Facebook and things like that, but if people are doing jobs that aren't really priorities, then you could argue at one level they're demotivated. In other words, they don't have a clear direction of what they should do. Now, that's reasonably easy to rectify, because it's just a question then of you, 1, noticing, and 2, giving some feedback and getting them back on track. But that's a level of motivation. So what we want to do is have people doing the right thing in the right way at the right time. And that is one dimension of motivation. So you think about it, the direction that people put their effort into is clearly a dimension of motivation. The second one, going clockwise, is persistence. That is how long they endure. So if people give up very easily, or they put things in too hard baskets or anything like that, then clearly they're not persistent. So persistence is probably a more common perception of what motivation is. Stickability, if you like, the amount of time and effort people put into pursuing and completing a project or a task. So meeting deadlines and sticking to it and those kinds of things. Now, the other thing that's important is that people can be very persistent but very slow. So the last level or dimension of motivation is the intensity of the effort that they put forth. So this is people not wasting time, getting on with it, making sure that they do the most amount of work with the least amount of effort, that these people are efficient and effective. So that's important, because if you think about the people in your team and you're looking at motivation levels, you've got to ask yourself the question, is it the direction? Is it the persistence? Or is it the intensity? Now, that's important, because once you've worked out what that is, you can then start to address it, rather than just making a blanket statement like that person doesn't have any motivation. What is it about that person's work that's demotivating? Is it the direction, the persistence, or the intensity? So that's the first thing, just defining what that is so that we're very clear about what it looks like. Now, I want to share with you some myths around motivation that I think are very, very important, because, as I said at the outset, many of these myths are things that people believe that aren't necessarily true. So let's look at a few of them. One of the myths around motivation is this: you can't actually motivate people. You can only provide the circumstances by which people become motivated. In other words, it's their decision. As I said before, it's an inside job. So all you can do, and all I can do, is to create the environment that is conducive for people to make the decision to become motivated. Now, that's very important. It was certainly important to me when I was leading, because what it meant was that I could just do my very best. It didn't mean I should give up, but I'm only there to provide the environment for people. Ultimately, they have to make the decision. Now, we've all been to courses, and we've been to presentations, and you go to a presentation and you come out all inspired. The other person that you go with doesn't come out as inspired as you, but yet you were exposed to the same stimuli. So what's going on? Well, obviously you decided it was your choice about being inspired. It was the other person's choice not to be. So this is important, that you can just only provide the climate. It's ultimately up to the individual. That's one myth, that the myth is that we can motivate people. The second myth on this slide is that everybody has a degree of motivation, but not everyone's inspired. Now, just getting out of bed this morning is, in fact, has to have a degree of motivation. And so, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I know somebody in my team that doesn't fit that bill. I would imagine that they're not motivated at all. Well, just for a moment, just imagine you took them out to a river or some body of water, and you grab them by the scruff of the neck and you push their head underwater. Don't advise you to try this, of course. You push them underwater. You will find that they will make every single effort possible to come to the surface. In other words, it demonstrates that there is a motivation there. It's just that in the work perhaps that they're doing, they're not inspired, and there is a difference. So everyone has some degree of motivation. I'm sure many of you have talked to people in the lunchroom and found out what their interests are, and it's quite amazing, some of the interests that people have outside work, and you sort of think to yourself, well, I wish they'd bring that into the workplace. So everyone, to an extent, is motivated. It's just that they're not inspired. Now, the third aspect is, or the third myth is that motivation is not an objective measure. You can't just try one thing and expect everyone to be motivated. Motivation is a totally subjective subject. So we've all got different levels of motivation. We've all got different things that motivate us. And then later on, when I show you these 10 things that motivate people at work, the fact that there are 10 indicates that there's quite a wide spread. Could be their age, could be where they are in their career, it could be how they're feeling about their job. There's all sorts of possibilities that people are motivated by. So the key thing for you is to watch, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, and listen and watch and determine what it is that makes that person tick. Because once you can work that out, of course, you can create the environment for them to become motivated. It's not that simple, and it's not always simply by asking, but as you'll see later, that could be a first step in the right direction. So we're all motivated by different things. Now, the dangerous thing is that what motivates you and me is actually not what perhaps motivates other people. But we make an assumption that people are motivated by that, so off you go and you try that and you get disappointed and realize it doesn't work. It's because there are other motivators there that you haven't covered. Another myth around motivation is that intrinsic motivation is a lot more powerful than extrinsic. For years and years, we've been using what we call the carrot and the stick to motivate people, rewards and recognition on the one hand and punishment on the other. Now, that works quite well when you're working with people who don't perhaps have a high formal education standard, but most of us aren't actually motivated by the carrot and the stick to the extent that we should be. The key thing for you is to try to get people to be extrinsically motivated. In other words, doing things for themselves, intrinsically motivated, I should say, doing things for themselves. And because obviously if you've got to give people rewards and punishment, so to speak, then what happens when your back's turned? Then obviously their reliance on you has disappeared. So what we've got to try and do is get people intrinsically motivated. And recruiters tell me all the time that what they try to do when they're recruiting someone is find someone that's intrinsically motivated, intrinsically meaning within. So by doing that, people have got a better chance then in the world of work. Another myth, and this is a bit controversial, but another myth here is that money is a motivational force. Now, obviously, if we stop paying people in local government, all of a sudden there'd be a huge upheaval, a riot perhaps. Obviously, people to a certain extent need to be paid. But what we have found is that if you pay people more, you don't necessarily get a commensurate level of motivation. So, for example, think of one of your team members. If you could actually wave a wand and increase their income, double their income, would you get necessarily double the effort? You might initially, but you wouldn't necessarily get that over a period of time. I'm not sure. So you wouldn't get that. Okay, so look, and have a think about that, because I know people complain about motivation all the time, money all the time, but the reality is up to a certain threshold, money no longer becomes a motivational force. The next principle of motivation is that really, if you dumbed it down completely, motivation is about avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. So every single thing we do in life is to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Now that sounds very simple, but the trouble is each of us conceptualize pain and pleasure differently. So, someone robbing a bank might see it as quite painful to say no to their crew, to their gang. So, of course, they participate. For me, and probably you, I would find it painful to be involved in a robbery because I might get caught, and I don't want to be going to jail because I'd find that a very painful experience, no doubt. So we are driven by this duality of pain and pleasure. And so the key is what is painful for one person may not be for someone else, and what is pleasurable for one person may not be for somebody else. So that's where it becomes quite complicated. So I just wanted to set the scene here before we sort of launched into some very practical things around what we can do in order to get people to be motivated. So if you've got any questions, any observations, any comments, I'd be happy to hear those at this stage. But while you might be thinking about those, let's keep moving on. Now, what I'm going to share with you now are these 10 items that I mentioned that came out of the Harvard research. Now, you'll notice down the bottom, it's a few years old now, but I don't think things have changed too much. And what I'm going to do is share with you what these 10 items are. Now, let me just reiterate, 9,000 employees were invited to involve themselves in this survey. 9,000 people across 21 industries across 3 continents. So it was a pretty good spread. There were not-for-profits, there was government organisations, and of course private sector. So it was a very good sample. And these people were asked a simple question, and the question was this: if there was one thing that you could identify that was important to you in being motivated at work, what would it be? Simple question. All people had to do is to write down a word or a sentence or a few words that described what it was that they considered to be the #1 motivational force. Now, I'm going to ask you, I'm not going to put these up yet, but could I ask you now just to type in what you think #1 is? Would anyone like to have a go? Just type in, what do you think the #1 driver for people at work is? Anyone like to type in what they think might be the #1 driver? I'll just give you a chance to type something in before we go through. Jake says job satisfaction. Yes, it's true, Jake, I think, but you'll find that all of these things, these 10 things, add up to that #1 job satisfaction. But thanks for your response. Anyone else? Self-esteem, says Kaylin. Yeah, self-esteem, you know, the feeling of having some degree of autonomy and importance is definitely on the list, Kaylin. So definitely there. Anyone else? Autonomy, says Malcolm. Yeah, well, obviously, having the freedom to make your own choices and decisions in the workplace is definitely on the list, Malcolm. So thank you. All right, are we ready? Drum roll. Are we ready to look at the first one? Here's the first one. It might surprise you. Now remember, this isn't my work. So these 9,000 people, all that information was collected, and it was a frequency survey. So #1 on the list was the one that came up the most frequently out of those 9,000 responses. Here it is. Does that surprise you? To work for efficient managers. So #1 on the list was to work for efficient managers. And I think when I first saw this, I was a little surprised, as you might be, but when I thought deeply about it, all the other 9 are actually a direct result with how people are led. So to work for efficient managers. Now, the old adage that people don't leave organisations, they leave managers is very true. I've done lots and lots of exit interviews across a lot of industries. And exit interviews, of course, are the last interview that you do when someone walks out the door. So they give you an official reason why they're leaving. And then unofficially, because there's no consequence, they tell you the real reason. And I can assure you that the main reason that people leave a job is because they can't work with their boss. So I get that all the time. Now, local government, there's a fairly secure sort of job market. You probably wish some people would leave, and maybe they should. But at the end of the day, if you and I can become more effective leaders, we will do a lot, according to this survey at least, to be able to create the motivational environment for people to give their best. So that's number one on the list. What's number two? Number two on the list is that people said that they want to think for themselves. So some of you, of course, mentioned and guessed this. People want to be able to have some degree of autonomy. They don't want to be micromanaged. And if any of you have been micromanaged or are micromanaged, there's nothing more soul destroying than that. And I've been there, and some of you may be there, but for heaven's sake, don't be a micromanager. And be honest with yourself and ask yourself the question, am I prone to that? Am I such a perfectionist that I have to be looking over the shoulders of people all the time? I can assure you it's not going to work well for you. So people want to think for themselves. Now, some of you might say, well, I wish some of my people did think for themselves. That's true. But nevertheless, that's what people want in their work, number two. Number three on the list is that people want to see the end result for their work, which I find really interesting. Now, I won't mention the local government. There was one local government I was working in Queensland, and what I did is I went out to the outdoor, the outdoor employees, and I asked them, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your current job satisfaction? Just give me a score, 10's high, 1's low, and each person gave me a score. They didn't necessarily give me a reason for it. And then what I did is I added, there were hundreds of people I spoke to, and it was in a formal sort of environment. Set it all up, and then I divided it by the number of people and came up with an average. And I came up with an average of 6.1. So 6.1 for the outdoor staff. I then went into the indoor environment, and I asked people in administration and governance and HR and all of the indoor type of workforce that we have in our local governments, and I asked them the same question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your current job satisfaction? Again, I collected all the data and I divided it by the number, and I came up with a score of 5.6. Now, I was surprised by that. In other words, the outdoor staff had a higher degree of job satisfaction. Now, that's just one environment. I'm not suggesting it's applicable in your council, but that was one environment. I went back out to the outdoor team and I asked a few people, I said, why did you score it as you did? Can you give me some reasons? And the overwhelming reason that I got was that people said, because we can see the results of our work. We can see the pothole that's been filled in. We can see the fence that's been mended. We can see the bridge that's been built. We can see the gardens and parks and how they look after they've been, attended to. So what it means is this, that when you can see the line of sight between the work that you do and the end result, motivational levels go up. So the challenge for those of you who are working in indoor environments is this: how can you create a line of sight between what seems like a mindless report that you're asking someone to do and the end result? Now, you might not be able to see it, but you can explain it. And this is important. So what I suggest you do is you explain the implications of doing it or not doing it. If you do that, you will improve the ability of the person to see the end result of the work that they do. And don't assume that they will see it, because in their moment of filling out something or doing something that seems quite mundane, they're not thinking to themselves that this is going to be important for so-and-so to make a decision. Or if I don't do this correctly, someone's not going to be able to do their job correctly. Now, those things are true, but they don't see it that way. Your job is to explain that to people. So seeing the end result is critically important. Number 4 on the list is that people want to be assigned interesting work. Now, a lot of work we do in local government, let's be honest, is drudgery. It's not terribly exciting, but it has to be done. And we know that. And of course, it's the same across all industries. But wherever possible, if you can give people some interesting, enjoyable work projects to do, you are likely to create an environment where some people might rise to the occasion and become motivated. So people want some variety, they want some interest in the work that they do, and I think that's a fair and reasonable thing, and I think most of us would feel the same way. So have a think about that. Number 5 on the list. Now, number 5 on the list is that people want to be kept informed. People want to know what's going on. There's 2 things that people want to know in their work. One is they want to know how they're going in their work and what's coming up, and they want to know what sort of things are going to impact on their work. They want to know that, and your job is to give them that information. But also they want to know what's going on with the organisation in general. So if there's a new person that started that's unfamiliar in the hallway, they want to know who that person is, what's their role, what are they doing. People want to know what council directions are being taken. They want to know that information. So people want to be kept informed, and as you know, many people will complain and say they never get told things around here. And of course, there's this old saying that you'll get told on a need-to-know basis, or no news is good news. Now, when you hear that, of course, what the manager's really saying is that I'm not going to be prepared to keep you informed, and the only time I'm going to keep you informed is when you need to know. It's not a question only of when people need to know. People want to know what's going on. So there's something to think about. Number 6 on the list is, and this comes back to Kaylin's comment about self-esteem. People want to be listened to. Now, I know how hard this is, because every time you talk to someone, you know what they're going to say. And it's very hard not to sit there and have the glaze in your eyes while the person's going through what they're trying to say, or just cutting straight to the chase and explaining to them that that's not possible. But people want to feel that they're being listened to. So that means that we've got to be patient, take our time, not prejudge people, and give people a chance to have their say. So what that means in practice is, in a team meeting, if you're sitting around a table and everybody's had a contribution except one person, which is quite possible, you should defer to that person in the meeting and say, Fred or Mary, is there anything you would like to add that hasn't already been said? Now, Fred and Mary might say no, but the point is that you're giving them that opportunity, you're valuing their input, and you're letting everybody else know in the team that you are interested in their input as well. So listening to people is really important. Certainly that's what the 9,000 people are telling us. Number 7 on the list is that people want to feel a sense of respect. And again, it comes back to Kaylin's comment about self-esteem. Now, you may not like the people you work with, you may not socialise with the people you work with, you may not associate with the people you work with beyond the workplace. That's not the point. You should fundamentally respect them as human beings. So treating people fairly and equitably, listening to what they have to say, taking the time, spending moments with them is critically important, because people do have a yearning to feel a sense of respect. Now, you might say, well, some people haven't earned that right. They have earned that right just by being in the workplace under your leadership. So what you've got to do is suspend your personal judgment about them and just respect them as people. It'll go a long way. Number 8 on the list is to be recognised for the work that you do, that they do. So you don't have to have a morning tea, down tools, and have a big song and a dance about somebody's effort in the workplace. That could actually embarrass people. But what you should do is say thank you. Thanks for spending time on that project, even though it was very frustrating. Thank you for dealing with that ratepayer the way you did. It must have been tough. Thank you for speaking up in the meeting when you did, and so on and so forth. Just saying thank you is recognition. And any one of us in this room, in this presentation, can do that. So say thank you more. and you don't need to go to great extents and lengths to recognize people's behavior. You might recall in the very first module we talked about looking at feedback and talking about positive feedback. Positive feedback is recognition. So what you're trying to do is to give people a sense of recognition. And I want you to have a go at this afternoon after lunch. Number 9, believe it or not, people said that they want to be stretched and challenged. Now, they don't want to be put in a position where they'll sink. They want to be able to swim. But people generally want to feel that they're being stretched somewhat. Not everybody, but again, this is what came out of the list, out of the research. So give people an opportunity, challenge people, let them know that you believe that they can do it and support them along the way, and you'll go a long way to fulfilling that particular motivational dimension. And the final one on the list is that people want to feel that they've got opportunities to increase their skill development. So people do generally want that and need that. It's not necessarily about sending people off to training courses. It could well be that it's about just coaching them, buddying them up with someone else in the workplace who's got a higher skill level that you can trust, whatever it might be. So there's the 10. Now, I suspect that many of you would not be surprised by any of the 10, but I think the interesting one is number 1. And if you actually think about it, as I said before, the other 9 are actually a direct result of number 1. So in other words, if you are an efficient manager, then it's highly likely that you're doing the other 9 things. So you can use that as a checklist to start thinking about what you might do to get the very best out of the people that you lead by creating that motivational environment. So if anyone's got any questions or comments, happy for you to type them in there in the question box, and I'll deal with them. All right, just while you're thinking that through, one of the things you could do is think about this question. If you've got one person who's just not motivated or doesn't seem to be motivated, what do you do? What's the answer to that question? What can you do? Well, there's a simple answer, and the simple answer is ask. Ask them, right? What do you ask them? Well, you ask them a question like this. All right, is there anything that I'm doing or not doing that will help you be more engaged in your work? All right. Now, it's worth asking the question. You may get nothing back, but what is it doing? And well, it's first of all, it's showing a sense of respect, because obviously by asking, you're interested. You're also indicating that you're willing to change yourself as a result of what they might say. It doesn't mean you will, but you're willing to at least be open to that. So wonder if that's a good idea. So I might have a conversation with someone and say, I might be wrong, but my sense is that your job satisfaction is not too high at the moment. Am I right in thinking that? And they might say, yeah, you're probably right. And say, well, what is it about the job that you don't like? What could I do or not do that might improve your ability to enjoy your job more? Because I may well be happy to do that, but I need to know, you see. So you can have a conversation with someone about those things, and that can be quite powerful. So that's a little tip for you that might work for you. Now, one of the things I want to share with you is this concept of non-job roles that I mentioned earlier on in the presentation. So let's go through those and just have a look at what I mean by non-job roles. So if you think about the work that people do, it's two-dimensional. So what I mean by two-dimensional is that you've got some work, or most of the work that people do, is their job role. Now, their job role is obviously what's on their job description. That's their technical capability to do the job. Now, that in itself is there. There are KPIs around that. You have certain expectations that we've gone through in previous webinars around that, and that's not where the problem lies. You might think it is, but it's on the other side. This is the non-job role. So if you think of the other dimension that people do or not do. It's their non-job roles. Now you might say to me, what do you mean by non-job roles? Well, these are roles that aren't necessarily written in the job description, but nevertheless you expect people to show these things, exhibit these things day to day. It makes your life a lot easier if they do. Now I've selected 4 of these things from the book at the bottom there, one of the books that I've wrote. And I thought, well, what are the 4 things that are critically important in local government or any industry at all? So this is across all industries. So what are the things we expect of people when they're in the workplace? Well, I think there are 4 things. There's probably more, but let's look at 4. Now, one of the things I expect, and you should expect, is have people having a positive attitude and enthusiasm. That's a role. Now, I don't expect people to be bouncing off the walls when they come to work. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that people shouldn't be coming to work backbiting, pointing fingers of blame, undermining you, being negative all the time, making no positive contributions in meetings. All of those things are highly destructive to our workplace. And then what we try and do is we just avoid it and we don't really try and confront it. I think it's fair and reasonable for you to have conversations with people about that. Now you might say, well, that's very subjective. It's not really. I could be sitting in your workplace for 20 minutes and I can determine who is exhibiting this role, who in your team has a positive attitude and enthusiasm. I could work it out very quickly, and I'll guarantee to you, you and I would agree because it's obvious. So what you have to do is use, as I've said before in this Lunch and Learn series, critical incidents to point out to people what they need to do. So that's one role. What's another role? Well, we all expect people, do we not, to be team players. We expect people to operate in teams. We don't expect people to be selfish and not assist their colleagues and all the rest. But again, you'll find in local government there'll be people that'll often say to you even that I'm not a team player. I just come to work and do my job. I'm not interested in being part of a team. Well, I'm sorry, you should be interested in being part of the team because that's what you get paid to do. And I expect that you will be. And so again, that's a role that we expect people to play. We expect people to be team players. Now, again, we can go overboard with this. I'm not suggesting we want them to be cheerleaders, but what we at least want them to do is to be able to work harmoniously in a team of people, irrespective of whether they like or dislike the person. That's not negotiable in my book. A third role that we expect of people working in teams is the role of career development. We actually expect people to continually grow and develop in their role, in their position. Now, how often do you hear people saying, oh, I'm too old to go to that training course, or I've been using this same spreadsheet for many years, I don't want to change. People say that all the time. To me, that's not negotiable. We actually need people to be able to continually upgrade their skill sets. Now, it's not really just about you as the leader, it's about them too, because obviously their career depends on it. Because if people are going to be dinosaurs, then they're going to actually destroy their chances of becoming employable, and that's problematic. And the final role we expect of people is this role, and that is to be innovative and continuously improving. Now, the difference between the third one, career development, and the fourth one is that the career development one is about them improving themselves, and number 4 is about them coming to work with ways and means of becoming more efficient and effective on the job. So I expect people to come to work with ideas about making their working environment more efficient and effective. But I can tell you this, unless you have conversations with people, and we went through the 5 conversations framework last time, unless you do that, you will find that people won't volunteer their ideas and their thoughts necessarily. So you need to talk to people about that and do it one-on-one rather than in a team in meeting. You'll find that people will come up with some decent ideas. So can you imagine what your team would be like if everyone had a negative attitude? They were individuals, not team players. They'd stop learning and they weren't interested in improving the environment. I don't care what skill level they would have. I would imagine that that would be a highly demotivated team. So I guess my point is that in local government, we're too focused on the things on the left-hand side and not focused enough on the things on the right-hand side. So please understand that the things on the right-hand side are critically important to team success and getting the best out of people. So I share that with you, food for thought, because I think a lot of us turn a blind eye to some of this, or we're just hoping that all of a sudden things will improve. Probably not. You need to draw a line in the sand and let people know what you expect of them. Now, I want to finish up. We've got about 15 minutes, and if you've got any questions or comments or observations, go for your life. Now's your chance. But I want to finish up the presentation, as I promised, with some of the reputable motivational theories that are out there in the world, and just talk about each of those and think about their application in the workplace. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs has been around since the 1930s. Maslow was an industrial psychologist, and I heard an interesting story, or read an interesting story, that he actually drew this on a napkin in a restaurant. And he wasn't convinced that it was necessarily terribly insightful, but of course it took off and it became hugely popular. And I think part of the reason for that, it was so easy to understand and it looks so valid to the way people like to operate. But essentially what he said was that there is a hierarchy of needs, and that when one need is fulfilled, it no longer becomes a motivator, that there's a higher need that needs filling. So for example, at the very lowest level is the physiological needs. That's air, food and water. So the argument is, if people haven't got food to eat, air to breathe, or water to drink, then they're not interested in anything else but survival at that point. Now, fortunately, when people come to work in local government, those things are pretty much fulfilled. But I'll give you a little example. My wife's a school teacher, and it doesn't matter how wonderful her lessons are in the morning, if a child comes to school without a good breakfast, they will be focused on that before anything else, because that's their fundamental need according to Maslow. The next set of needs, once that's been met, is safety needs, which cover both physical and psychological safety. People need to feel safe at work. They need to feel safe that they won't be injured, and they need to be safe that they won't be bullied or harassed in any particular way. Now, again, there are laws in place for that, and there are things in place that prevent that. It's not that they don't happen, of course, but, they're things that can be relatively easily managed in your workplace. Now, once those needs are met, the next set of needs is the sense of belonging. So what I mean by that is that people must feel that they have a sense of belonging in the team. So, for example, if you've got a new person that started up in the team, you should get with them after their first week of work and say to them, I'm interested to know, because you've got fresh eyes, what are we doing well here and what are we not doing well? And then be prepared to listen to what they've got to say. I'll guarantee to you that they'll have some good insights. I also guarantee to you that they'll feel a sense of motivation because you're fulfilling a couple of the needs that I mentioned earlier on in that list of 10 things. So people need to feel part of the show. And once that need's been met, they then need to feel a sense of esteem or accomplishment. And what I mean by that is they must feel important, that their opinion is valued, that you're prepared to listen to them at the right time, in the right place, and for the right reason. So they need to feel that that's going to be fulfilled. So their self-esteem is very, very important. Now, if that need's been met, they get to the top of the apex, which is what Maslow originally called self-actualization. These are people who are motivated by challenge. These are people who feel that they want to stretch and grow in the workplace. Now, because it's the top of the apex, there are only a fraction of the people inside your organization who are at the top of the apex. Okay? Now, you may be one of those people, and you may assume that other people are feeling the same way. Not necessarily. So where you can have the greatest impact is in the sense of belonging and in the sense of esteem areas. And if you do those things well, you'll go a long way to creating the environment that's needed. All right, now the next one that I'm going to look at is McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. Now, it's a busy slide and you can read it later, but essentially what it means, it's very simple. Theory X managers have certain assumptions about human nature which aren't terribly positive. I've worked for a Theory X manager and it isn't particularly enlightening, I can assure you, and maybe you have, maybe you are. I hope you're not one. But a Theory X manager is someone that believes that people dislike work. They believe that people must be forced to do the job. They feel they need to be directed, otherwise nothing will happen. That people won't take responsibility. That they're motivated by fear. That they have very little creativity and genuinely new ideas. Now, can you imagine what it'd be like being led by someone like that, as I have? It's not terribly motivational. They're second guessing you, they're making assumptions about you that aren't actually correct, whereas a Theory Y manager is likely to believe the best of human nature, that people do enjoy work, they need to work, that there's a sense of satisfaction that comes from work. They thrive on responsibility if it's given to them in a prudent way, that they're motivated by developing themselves. Now, you would want to be a Theory Y manager rather than a Theory X manager, and I want to ask you to think about that and think, well, where am I? Am I a Theory X manager, or am I a Theory Y manager, or am I somewhere in between? It's important to have a think about that, because your attitude to human nature and the assumptions that you have about people are critically important to the motivational climate that you're creating in your workplace. Okay, now Daniel Pink, who wrote a great book called Drive, The Surprising Truth About Motivation, great book if you want to get a book on motivation, and he argues that the simple issue of carrot and stick do not work anymore. And he argues that what we should be using is three key concepts. And he says that if you think about people that you lead, they need three things essentially. They need autonomy, that is to think for themselves, and you saw from the survey before that that's critically important. They need to feel that they're developing as people, and they need to have a purpose or a why. They need to see the line of sight between what they're doing and what the end result is. So these things become critically important when we're trying to motivate people. I love it as a model. It's simple to understand. It makes a lot of sense. I guarantee that if I was leading you, these would be the three things that you would be expecting of me. And if I was doing my job correctly as your leader, I'd be giving you some freedom of thought. I'd be giving you an opportunity to develop yourself, and I'd also be giving you some clarity around how your work impacts on the big picture. So ultimately, that's a very good model, I think, that you could include in your own thinking. So let's sum all this up as we come towards the end of our time together. What I've got here is 9 pillars or nine kind of things that you can do right now that will make a difference in creating this environment that will bring the best out of the people that you lead. So let's go through each one, starting at the top on the left-hand side, clarifying the task. If you give people very clear direction and instruction of what the task is, why it's important, and what the implications are for getting it right, you're on the right track. So don't assume that the other person knows. Spend some time exploring that and explaining that to people. That's the starting point. Another thing that you can do, and of course we've had a whole topic on this, haven't we, is give people regular feedback. This is critically important. So give people regular feedback, and keep doing it, because that's one of the things that you saw the slide in the very first unit that we ran, that no feedback leads to less motivation than just negative feedback. So you've got to give feedback to people. Show people how they can contribute. In other words, explain the nature of the work. Now, the great news is in local government, it's all about making the community more effective, making the community better. So everything that's said, thought and done inside any council should be directed towards making the community a better place to live. So it is possible for you to be able to draw a line of sight between any job that's done inside council and the end result. Encourage goals. Encourage people to set goals and to set themselves challenges is important. Match people's job with the work, their personal motive. So wherever possible, give people enjoyable and challenging assignments to do. You can't always do that, I get that, but wherever possible, it can become really important. Make apparent the personal gains and personal and team productivity. So measure success. Let people know if you've got some good feedback from ratepayers. Let people know about how your job and what your team do contributes to the big picture. Down on the bottom row, recognise individual success. All right, this is about giving people recognition, saying thank you, that you appreciate the effort that they put in. Remove organisational roadblocks, and heavens knows local government's got plenty of those. So whatever you can do to remove roadblocks that will help people to actually achieve is a good thing. And of course, as a supervisor or a leader, make sure that you're not the roadblock. Make sure that you're practicing all of these 8 things. And if you're doing that, you'll create the environment that's likely to be more prosperous in terms of motivation. So that's pretty much it from me, folks. Unless there's any questions, any comments. Of course, you can send me questions and comments via email as well if you choose to, but that pretty much brings us to the end. And I'm going to give you homework as normal, and I want you to practice this. And the good news is I want you to do this now, straight after lunch. I want you to use autonomy, mastery and purpose in all of your leadership decisions and conversations from now on in. I want you to stick with it, and I want you also, of course, to complete that profile. So I'm sending you out an email this afternoon, and in that email you will be required to complete a profile, and that will be great if you can get onto that before we meet again in 2 weeks. But the objective is for you to practice autonomy, mastery and purpose. So folks, that's pretty much it from me. So thank you again. I wish you a great weekend. I wish you all the best, and we'll see each other again in 2 weeks. Thank you and goodbye.